Good morning on this 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time. Did you ever have someone in your life completely change? Maybe this happens a lot, maybe when we're younger, teenage years, and you have a friend and all of a sudden their interests change, their character, disposition, attitude, mindset changes. Can also happen, I guess, when we're older, especially people of Alzheimer's or dementia. Maybe it happened to your mom and dad. I know it happened in my family where, one had Alzheimer's and their character completely changed. They became very nasty, using swear words, hitting the nurses, things that they never did their whole life. And all of a sudden it changes. And with the change, we might use this expression, I don't even know who they are anymore, So that's what I'm trying to get at here this morning. And I think that's probably a good way of looking at today's gospel passage. The overall context, we're in Luke chapter 13 now. If chapter 12 was about being aware of the leaven of the Pharisees, chapter 13 is about the problem of sin. The chapter begins with a reading that we've gotten this year during Lent, where people ask about these Galileans whose blood was mixed with the sacrifices of Pilate, as well as an incident that happened at a tower, fell and killed, I think the number is like 18 people. And people ask Jesus this question, did this stuff happen because they were great sinners? And Jesus says, unless you don't avoid sin in your life, greater things will happen to you than what happened to these people. Okay, so kind of like a twofold teaching there. One, again, the problem and nature of sin to get rid of in your life, and then two, the idea that tragedies that happen doesn't mean that because you're a great sinner than other people. People unfortunately are killed in horrific accidents or go through some horrific disease or horrific accident that leads them very limb. Whatever happens to us in life, doesn't mean that one was a great sinner and another. I don't know if I'm making sense with that, but maybe another point to drive home is a sense of we're in hurricane season now, so down south they have always these threats of hurricanes, and sometimes they make landfall and cause a lot of destruction. It doesn't mean that those people were greater sinners than others. Okay, that's pretty much what I'm getting at. But anyways, the whole chapter is dealing with this problem of sin. And when we look at the gospel passage, it begins with a question. Lord, will only a few people be saved? Why ask that question? Like, what's the reference? What's the context of that question? Well, it's all about the gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel, 10 of whom were lost in history. And so it was a highly contested debate whether the Messiah, when he comes, is he going to gather all the 12 tribes or just a small remnant? That's why the question is being asked. But again, Jesus really doesn't answer that question. Instead, he says what? He says, strive to enter through the narrow gate, where a lot of people are going to try to enter, but only few are going to be strong enough to get through. And, that's really the nature of sin. It's that it's hard. It's hard to overcome in our life, and it requires a lot of dedication, discipline. But I think most importantly, a lot of reliance on God. I think one of the things I see a lot of people struggle in confession and spiritual direction. They always have the mindset that I have to fix this problem. Whatever it is, whatever the sin is, I have to do this. If I just pray the rosary more, if only I just do this. And again, the mindset the mindset's right. Yeah, I don't want to say don't do those things. But what they always leave out is the help of divine grace, because we are not strong enough to do this. okay? But God is. So the more that we incorporate and realize that the way we're going to overcome sin in our life is really a help and reliance on God. He's going to be the source, and really the only source in which we're going to do it. Now, again, doesn't mean that we just sit there and just wait for God to fix everything. But I think everything that we do, every dedication, every act of corporal or spiritual work of mercy that we want to do in this battle against sin, it always needs to be aided by divine grace. And so maybe that's the first thing that to keep in mind is the necessity of grace in our life, okay? And it's not just us trying to fix our problems. It's God who's the healer, right? This is why Jesus constantly does physical healings. It's not only to reveal his divinity, but also to reveal the mission. He's come to heal. He's come to heal us. He's come to raise us from the dead. But then he continues further, given a parable, and this is where I was getting at with the beginning of this homily. You know, he gives this parable, again, with another weird element in it. We'll get to that in just a second. With a master of a house who's locked his door, and people are knocking on the door asking to be let in. And the master of the house says, "I do not know you." Okay, so going back to the metaphor I was given at the beginning, where sometimes people change and we don't even know who they are anymore. And we were created, we were destined for God's greatness and glory. Sin changes that character so much so where, again, obviously in a metaphor type of way, God's like, I don't even know who you are anymore. You're not what I created to be. Okay, that's really the horrendous nature of sin. It almost makes us unrecognizable to our Creator. Our Creator destined us for His glory and His greatness, destined us to love, and sin is contrary to all those things. And so this is why I think Jesus kind of puts the parable. It frames it in this type of discussion. I don't know who you are. God doesn't know who sin is. And so the more we live in sin, and the more there is no desire to change sin, no desire for repentance. Again, no desire to incorporate God and say, hey, I need to be healed. I need to be saved. And the more we just kind of just live in our sin and don't try to do anything about it, it's leading to really a life of destruction, so much so where hell becomes a possibility in one's life. So notice at the very end, wailing and grinding of teeth. Those are always scriptural images of what hell's like, and how you'll see. Remember, he's talking to Jews who believe that they are inheritance of this kingdom. So then Jesus says, you'll see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the prophets, but you will be cast out, okay? Again, meaning that sin, and not one's nationality, not one's origin, sin is what is going to keep you out. This is why also at the end he says, all those from the north, the south, the east, the west will be welcome into the kingdom. These are all the Gentiles, right, who are told that they have no place in the kingdom because they're not of the line of Abraham. And Jesus reverses all of that, doing the will of the Father, allowing God to come into your life. All those things is what's going to let one into the kingdom. And sin works and acts against, especially the virtue of charity, is what's going to keep us out. It's a warning, but from time to time, we need to hear those warnings, right? And from time to time, we got to be reminded of the horrific reality of what actually sin is. Sometimes we say, oh, I do these little things, but, all sin is contrary to God, okay? So most importantly, allow Him to be your healer and your helper in the overcoming and struggle and reality of sin. May God bless you.